Hello, and welcome to the first Dolby Atmos Music Community Session of 2023. I'm Ben Guyver, Senior Creative Relations with Dolby Laboratories on the Music Partnerships team in Los Angeles, and I'm happy to be back. I hope everyone had a safe and relaxing holiday with their friends and family, and we're excited to again bring the Dolby Atmos music community together to share updates to the Dolby Atmos music ecosystem, share creative ideas and techniques and conversations featuring producers, mix and mastering engineers, and with key people from the Dolby organization as well to share new products and features with you, really to help you in your creative endeavors and bring folks together. And as these are community sessions, we really do value your input. Your feedback and suggestions are very important to us, so please do send them to musicwebinars@dolby.com. We do read them all. We'll also be sending out a survey in the coming weeks to the Dolby Creators Database, so please keep an eye out for that, and we'd really appreciate your feedback. In this month's session, we have a fascinating chat with artist, producer, and mix engineer Dennis Roc.AM Jones from Los Angeles. Roc has mixed some legendary artists in Dolby Atmos such as Frank Sinatra, Mary J. Blige, Erykah Badu, Nelly, Hart, and many others. And in this discussion, he shares with us his process for producing and mixing specifically in and for Dolby Atmos on some of his new projects, and the techniques he's using on those for deriving his stereo mixes from his Dolby Atmos mixes. He also shares some of his mix technique for getting that punchy hip-hop kick and bass and low end, how he treats vocals, and how he ensures that his mixes are translating to headphones and other devices from the studio. He really shares how he explores many different immersive music possibilities using Atmos in production and in the studio. It's a great talk, and you can add your questions to be answered live by Roc in the questions box here, or emailing them to musicwebinars@dolby.com. Before we jump into the chat with Roc, just a few quick updates for you. The Dolby Atmos Album Assembler version 1.1 was released at the end of last year, and this update includes some great new features to help you put those mastering, finishing touches on your songs and albums of ADMs. Some of those new features include song-based workflows, allowing you to create song markers from Atmos clips, and a number of handy options associated with that. Also, a new ADM export update that actually allows you to use time code options and batch exports for multiple songs. So that's super handy as well. There are a number of other great features and updates included in this update as well. Be sure to check out the new features video for the Dolby Atmos Album Assembler version 1.1 at professional.dolby.com. Also, if you missed our deep dive session on using the Atmos Album Assembler with Dolby's Jordan Glasgow, which featured Georgetown masters Andrew Mendelsohn and Luke Armentrout, you can find that session at professional.dolby.com and at our YouTube site. It's a full demo and technical conversation with Jordan and the Georgetown guys. Super awesome overview. You can also grab a 90-day trial of the Album Assembler at the Pro site now. Also from Dolby Institute is a new Spanish language advanced mixing techniques video, continuing in the series with engineer Luis del Toro. This installment provides an advanced overview of mixing, mastering, and binaural workflows, and follows along in the series of great videos that Luis has hosted in Spanish on studio setup and mixing basics. Great stuff there. Be sure to check that out. And also, if you haven't yet, be sure to check out Dolby Institute's track breakdown and workflow video with Natalia and Robin from Abbey Road Institute in Miami, taking you all the way through the awesome work they did on a track called Miracle by the artist Riza. It's shot from their studio at Miami Art House and is an in-depth look at their process all the way from setup through delivery. Great video. You're probably aware that the Dolby Institute site also houses the newly updated learning management system. That's where the self-guided learning curriculum and the links to the Pro site live, with our software downloads, the knowledge base, quick start videos, community forums, and FAQs. All of those resources are contained right there. I also wanted to quickly mention that we have an updated 2023 content creation quick start guide at the pro site that we've also recently sent out to the community. And that's a really convenient doc with links to help you quickly get up and running for mixing Dolby Atmos music or getting your studio set up. Of course, also at the pro site is the onboarding form for new studios and the room guidance resources. So be sure to check those out as well. So in our last music community session, we featured mix engineers Jimmy, the Senator Douglas, and Chiara Moreno from the Magic Mix Room in Miami, as they talked about the great Atmos mix work they're doing on records by Coast City and Justin Timberlake, and the mentorship sessions that Jimmy hosts at his studio. So shout out to both of them for the great conversation there last round. And for this one, let's now jump into a conversation with artist, producer, and mix engineer Dennis Roc.AM Jones. Please submit your questions, and Roc will answer them live after. It's a pleasure to be joined by Roc now, and looking forward to talking to you about the awesome mix work you're doing and the workflows you're pioneering for producing in Dolby Atmos. So welcome, Roc.
Thank you. I appreciate you for having me, man.
Yeah, man. So let's start with a little bit of background. And folks are always interested in how mixers and producers get going in the business. And you've mixed some of the greats in Atmos and beyond. So we'll definitely get into that. But who or what were some of your influences coming up, and how did you get started in music production?
So it all really started, when I was young, I was a kid, I was heavily influenced by music because, I had an older brother who was, a rapper. And my mom, I grew up in a church setting. So in the church, it was just, I was so interested in it because it was so musical. We had instruments, drums, choirs. So that's really where my interest in music started as a kid, as a child. And I grew up in the church. And then it kind of like evolved into just, other things. And then I started to get into like predominantly like hip hop and R&B and stuff like that. Um, my mom, she was like a really like church going woman. And, if it wasn't like gospel music and things like that, she wasn't really for it. So, I had to find a way to be able to excel in music. So that's why, I started to do things like play drums and, play keyboards and things like that. Um, and yeah, that's really where it started for me. A lot of my influences are, early on, like Jay-Z, Kanye, Erica Badu. Um, these are the people that I was listening to as I was growing up.
Nice, man. Well, I mean, Jay-Z, Erica, those are people coming from a place of such passion, right? I'm sure like your mom could hear how
Absolutely.
passionate and energetic and soulful those artists are. And I'm sure it
Hmm.
opened your ears to what it is that you were working on. So how'd you get involved in actually like studio gigs, and what were some of the projects you started with as a producer and an engineer?
So funny. So still talking early on. I wasn't allowed to go to the studio back then. I wanted to be in the studio since a kid. And my mom, she's like, no, you're too young. I remember I used to sneak over. I found out I used to always hear loud music next door where I was living. But it wasn't like stereo loud music. It was just a distinctive kind of loud that was just like something's going on. So one day I spoke to the person that was, coming out, and I was just like, "You guys having a party or whatever?" And they're like, "No, we have a studio." So it was another producer, artist, or whatever. They had a studio next door. So I used to sneak and go next door just to see what they were doing when I would tell my mom I was out playing outside. But it really started from that, and then I was like, I need to figure out a way to like start recording. So I convinced her to buy me a karaoke machine, right? And I'm like, yo, it's just a sing along thing. And this was at the time when like karaoke machines had they had the CD player, and then you also had a tape, so you could record what you were doing on a CD. I mean, on a tape. So I would go like in Brooklyn down in Ocean Avenue, to like this place where they sell a lot of like mixtapes and instrumentals and things like that with no words. And I would buy the CDs, and I would use the CDs and record on like I would re-record on like all my brother's like Biggie tapes, which he killed me for. Um, and I would start, tracking myself. And then I was like, yo, how am I gonna be able to do like, like ad libs and dubs? So I'm my crazy self. I'm thinking, I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna get a tape recorder. And I'm gonna pre-record all of my ad libs and background vocals and record it at the same time while I'm playing like recording on the karaoke machine. So that was like the entry level to me really like thinking like creatively, like wow, like how can I make something out of nothing with music? Um, so then that led to, I went to school in Pennsylvania, and I had my first experience like on an actual DAW system. It was called Mixcraft at the time. It's all black and white. It was like a computer microphone, and I had a group of friends, and we would mess around and record and stuff. And then when it was time to eat or go out, I would stay in the basement and literally just be mixing and just I don't even know what I was doing, but I was editing, I was cutting, pasting, messing around with whatever was there, and I would literally do it for hours and hours a day because I was just like, this has to be perfect. You know what I mean? Um, and that went from there to actually recording in a real studio in the same area, um, with someone that I knew that was affiliated in the recording industry, not big, but he knew a couple of things, and I observed everything recording because I was also a recording artist as well. And later on, I ended up purchasing his studio, and that's where it all started. I was in my room locked in, just, figuring things out. One thing led to another, and, it got me into a bigger studio. And that's when I had the opportunity to really learn. And this studio predominantly worked on like with a lot of like analog and outboard gear and stuff. So I was so blessed to really have that incorporated into, what I know now, and understanding the importance of it, to be a hybrid mixer. And one thing led to another, one studio to the next studio, to I'm working with the biggest names in the industry, you know um but it all really was just me just staying consistent and always thriving to you know trying new things. That always opened the door for me. And so when I learned about Dolby, automatically I was geared towards it because I was like, this is just a new format and it's a revolutionary thing for music. I have to be involved.
That's awesome, man. Thanks for sharing that. Sounds like, a combination of, um, persevering and making sure that you're constantly progressing, getting your hands on as many different types of gear as you can, outboard stuff in the box, understanding the different workflows and being around the right people as well. And, when it comes to Dolby Atmos, like you mentioned, I mean, you've mixed for a wide range of like legendary artists. I mean, Mary J, Erica, who you mentioned, Nelly, I mean, Frank Sinatra. I mean, come on, right? I'm excited to hear about like your approach to some of those. But first, I'm curious, like, what was your introduction to Atmos, and like, what kind of sparked your interest, like you were mentioning from that first experience?
So, man, I mean, everything happens by mistake. That's just like, I don't know what it is. I literally align with, whatever, I think whatever it is that's for me. And what happened was I have a relationship with someone. Shout out to Rich. He's someone that I built a studio in 2018. It's called Vibe AM Studios. And this studio was built with the intention on I wanted to change the ecosystem of like the artist studio culture. I wanted to be a place where people didn't really have to rush. There wasn't really a time limit, very lenient, and I wanted to create an energy there that I can create that I knew that was good and for like a creative to go to. Predominantly it was for me. I wanted to perfect my craft and really lock into what it is that I wanted to do, artist wise, production wise. And, this guy Rich, he walked into the studio one day. Um, and it's just so funny, he came in with like a few other people affiliated that I was working with. And, he's looking around and he's like, wow, I love this place. Is this yours? And I'm like, yeah, and I'm telling him the whole backstory because there's like a crazy backstory about it. And, we kind of like exchange information. He was also in the studio business. And I thought nothing of it, like year after year, I would, reach out to him and just say, hey, what's going on? Let's go to lunch or let's talk. And we just kept in touch. I don't know why. It was just, the vibe was just like that. And then after about 4 years, this is in 2021, January, I believe it was, he sent me a text and he's like, do you know any engineers that know how to mix in Atmos? So I'm like, Atmos? So I'm like, hold on a second. So I went and did my due diligence, right? When you think Dolby, I'm thinking, like film and things like that. So I did my due diligence and I started doing research on this stuff, and I was intrigued. So I was like, wait a minute, what is this, like a new thing that's happening? So I got back to him and I said, you know what? I don't know any engineers who are mixing in Atmos, but I'll tell you one thing. I'm gonna learn how to do this. And he said, perfect. That same day was the day that Pro Tools released the Dolby Atmos certification. So it's so ironic that he texts me this information, and then later, a few hours later, an email comes to him about getting certified, and he sends it over to me, and I'm like, oh wow, this is meant to be. So now I have a way of really like dialing in on what this is about and learning, the early techniques and stages of it. So I signed up for the course, did the course and everything, and it was a good introduction, very informal. Um, and I kind of learned I had a starter point on how to get into Atmos. So he's like, listen, have some situations where we can, get some work for you is in terms of mixing, this, that, and the third. I want to be sure that you're ready and able to do this. So time goes, months go by, and he circles back and he's like, hey, I want to meet with you and see how things are going with Atmos. So I kind of left Atmos alone a little bit, and I kind of forgot about like a lot of the things that I learned. So they wanted me to come into the studio to play some mixes that I worked on. And I'm gonna be completely honest, I didn't really have any like presentable mixes. So that same night, I opened up the renderer and Pro Tools, and I said, I'm gonna redo this, reinvent this, and see what I come up with. I spent all night on my laptop. I'm messing around with things, and I'm doing the most drastic stuff because I'm like, I need to wow these people. They need to know that I know what's going on. And so I did it. Come in the next day, have a little meeting, interview, speak about, what I thought about it. And they were like, okay, we're gonna go into the studio and we're gonna play, your stuff. So I'm like sweating bullets. I'm like in the studio. I've never heard this stuff in a room before. I've only had a perspective from the headphones. And so we get in the room and I sent them the file, and this is my first Atmos experience in a room. It was like a 914 setup, I believe. Yeah. And so they hit play, and it was one of my songs. So I'm listening to it, and then all of a sudden, like a hi-hat comes like smacking me in the face from the left side, and I'm like, oh, and I'm like jumping, I'm like, and they're looking at me, and I'm like, I've never had this experience before. So now I'm like, I'm literally hearing what's been going on, like what I did in my brain and what I believe should have been the way that this mix was supposed to be heard. And I watched a lot of videos um on like a lot of like Steve Jenwick and all these the guys that did so much great big pioneers of Atmos, and I followed a lot of their rules. You know what I mean? So there was a lot of elements of structure, but then there was also a lot of chaos. So I think there was a median between that, and they were just like, okay, this is cool. We see that you're following certain rules, and we also see that you're being innovative. So that led to, the first experience. And then, I started to get gigs through that situation and so on and so forth.
Nice, man. Well, approaching it from, at the beginning, working on your own music, right? Like that gives you a completely different perspective, I think, than going into it mixing somebody else's, right? Like
Right,
now you're
right.
thinking of it from like a creation standpoint as well, and how all the way through the process you can, like you said, like bring out what's in your mind and and in your imagination,
Mm-hmm,
using this system now and using this space rather than being limited to,
mm-hmm.
a number of speakers. And like you're a man of multi talents in the studio, writer, producer, mixer. And we can
Absolutely.
talk about some of the like pioneering workflows that you're doing, but like, what's your philosophy, whether you're working in Atmos or in stereo, on kind of the role of the producer or the mix engineer when it comes to working with an artist, and kind of maintaining
hmm
that creative intent or bringing more of it out for them?
So I usually tell people, all the time, it's very important. Your engineer, your producer, these people are extremely the core of who you are and how you're developed. And I feel my job is to really create the the feeling as much as possible, to what they want, right? At the end of the day, when you speak to someone and you tell them like, this is my idea, this is how I want it to be, it's never really the case of you knowing exactly what they want. But as long as you're able to articulate what they're trying to express and bring it to life, that's what's important. You know what I mean? And my technique on mixing is not really so much on the technical side of things because I didn't learn that way. I learned by pressing a bunch of buttons and turning the gain up to max level to understand what I'm listening to. You know what I mean? I didn't really go to a school to learn this stuff. I watched a lot of videos and I had a lot of experience and I was blessed enough to really be in rooms with big, engineers from big to small producers and to actually learn. So trying things is always the go-to. Making those mistakes are always the go-to. Um, because what you do is you go all the way up and then you pull back, you know. Um, and I just think the creative process, there's no rules, there's no limitations. You know what I mean? Like we there's stories that you hear where people put a high pass filter on the entire song and that becomes a thing. That wasn't something that they were trying to do on purpose. These things are just done by either mistake or just people being expressive or trying new things. So with that in mind, I just always look to just do things non-traditional, like extremely non-traditional. So when Atmos came out, it to me that was like a very non-traditional thing because everything's in stereo. You know what I mean? So I'm like, all right, let's see what this is about. And yeah, that's really it from even an artist perspective. I think the same way because when you're working as an artist or writing or producing for anyone, they want you because they want to become the best version of themselves, right? Or they want to become a different version of themselves. So I'm always gonna push the narrative of doing things that you would never normally do. You know, if everyone's going right, we're gonna go left. Everyone's going up, we're gonna go down. If the sky is blue, it's not blue. So and that's always been just it's easy for people to identify.
I love that, man. I mean, you're taking chances and you're bending the rules. You're bringing things out of the artist that they may have trouble translating into the studio environment, but also you're using the studio as an instrument too, right? Like you're taking chances. And one of the interesting
Absolutely.
things you're doing, and maybe you can take us through some of this, is like your process and the creative decisions you're making when creating specifically in and for Dolby Atmos, is not only preserving the artist's intent, but again using the studio as an instrument, using all of the space that's available there and all of the tools to create this
Right.
compelling immersive piece of art from the beginning. So when you're
hmm
preparing for doing something like that, like whether it be from the artist or the producer's perspective, like how do you go into it thinking, okay, I'm going to start an original production now and
hmm
I want it to be ultimately, like, I want it to be an Atmos first?
Generally, I don't like to do any due diligence on the artist because I just feel it's going to be a conflict with how I create with them, right? Because obviously they want to work to a newer height, so I don't want to do anything that they're already doing. I like to get in the studio and really give them the lead on everything first, just to see like where they are, what they like to do, the things that they're uncomfortable with. And once I identify what they're uncomfortable with, that's what I go for, right? Um, Now when it comes to Atmos just kind of opens like a bigger perspective and it's like a new palette, right? And introducing that to them um, requires a lot of education. But then at the same time, when you're trying to be educational with someone that just wants to create, it can kind of get in the way. So you have to really articulate it in a way that makes sense to them, to whatever the situation is. Um, how I like to do that is I like to really talk about getting into the production of things, right? what things would sound like if they were in a different format. What would this hi-hat sound like if it was pushed this way? How would the tonality change of the song if we put certain things in the back? And what kind of experience are you really trying to recreate? And it all depends on the style of the record. You know, the record really holds the content. Some records call for it, some records call for a little bit more, conservative things. But that's really where I like to go in identifying what lane they want to go in with that. And then from there I kind of can carve out what I want to do production wise and Atmos and from the entire like in its entirety, and every artist is different. Every artist has a different approach. My goal is to kind of, bring my vision and my imagination to theirs and find some median somewhere where we can both agree on like, hey, this is super cool. Like I love this. Let's build on this part right here and let's move up.
So like with the hi-hat, for an example, or any other elements, are you actually like auditioning those elements in Atmos in the room at the time of creation? Like if you record a vocal, for example, are you then immediately listening to it with or without the artist in Atmos?
So now, like, when I'm producing stuff, I'm thinking a little bit more theatrical, cinematic. I'm thinking of using, more effects and things like that, right? I'm adding like car sounds. I'm adding sounds that I'm recording into, my phone. And now, depending on the frequency of what I'm getting from, let's say, a synth or a keyboard or drums or whatever the case is, I have a place where I feel is a good home for that instrument sonically and how it will fit in the room. Um, and these are all the things that I think about right away. So when I do that now, when I'm producing, I know like, okay, this is going to add to it and this is going to create more of a feel that we're looking for, right? It's all about feeling. I want whoever is listening to this song, right, to really understand like I'm talking about sitting in my car driving up Hollywood Hills. You hear trees and things flying by, other cars. You hear the car door open. Like now we're creating a bigger experience where we're engaging a lot more. And music is all about feel for me. Again, like I said earlier. So if we have a chance to engage more in the feeling perspective of music, then that's where I really like to thrive in. And it gives us the opportunity to, really bring that to the forefront, and every time, we have artists who come and they'll make their music and then you have to wait until you go to a concert to get that experience. And sometimes even at a concert, you're not going to get the full thing, but why not bring it home? Why not bring it to a place where you can sit down in a seat and you can literally go through a timeline of what's happening in the song or an album? And that's what's important right now. As we're growing and innovating, like technology is just becoming like it's out there. I mean, AI is here. We were talking about it the other day in the studio, and it was a freaky subject, but it's like it's so cool to just have these things accessible now. And I think as a creative artist, producer, engineer, entrepreneur, whoever you are, you need to indulge in all of these things because it's only going to make you better at whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Good stuff. And
Yeah.
it sounds like you're gathering assets from everywhere. You're recording it wherever the inspiration may hit or that sound may happen. And so,
Hmm.
are you kind of now working with more stems as you're going into production, which probably gives you a lot more flexibility than working
Absolutely.
in stereo?
In hip hop, this, and I'm not gonna say in hip hop. I mean, generally, like, you have your kick drum, your 808, hi hat, snare, a couple of synths, maybe some instruments, live instrumentation, whatever the case may be. But now, when you have Atmos or you're thinking Atmos, I'm already pushing to add more. I'm pushing myself to be more creative. Adding more is to be more creative. And a lot of times you don't have to go that far, but you know, to get the full effect of Atmos, you know what I'm saying? More, I'm not gonna say more is better, but when you have more, you have more options. There's more things that you can do. Um, and again, that changed my way of thinking of creating music. It changed the way I mix also, even for stereo. I'm not even mixing in stereo the same way because I'm so used to hearing like the way the room sounds and Atmos and like the DSP. Now when I'm going into stereo, I'm just like, I need this to almost match, like pretty much match this. You know what I mean? how am I going to do that? Or am I even going to even go into stereo anymore? You know? So it's a lot of it's a lot of things that are up and going, and again, based off how I feel is like what I like to run with. But now I'm just really all for starting in Atmos because I just feel like it creates, it's like top down selling. I learned like in business like about top down selling. And I'm like, I'm gonna start all the way up here so I can get the absolute most of whatever the biggest potential of this record. And then if I want to downsize it a little bit, I can do that as well. But I always have the max, you know what I'm saying?
I want to ask a couple of questions about mixing specifically, and then we'll go back to deriving your stereo mix from your Atmos mixes. But in terms of like hip hop production or R&B, where you really need that punch in the low end, what are kind
Mhm.
of like your go-to techniques for bass and managing your LFE? What have you found works best to really keep that punch?
It's very important to keep your stereo image, right? The stereo image is the body of the record. It's the core. Um, and what I like to do is, I like to flip back and forth, and I like to silence the stereo speakers. I mean, I like to not the stereo speakers. I like to silence all the speakers besides stereo to make sure I have those core things involved, right? So those things would be like anything with like big transients like drums, 808s, even certain perks and things like that, and things that are very consistent. And what I like to do is I like to, if I have a drum channel, like a bunch of drums, I will create a group. Once I have all the drums together, I will compress that group. And, if I need EQ, tape machine, decapitator, voice of gods, whatever it is to give it, that big, you know, um, low end, then I would slightly add LFE into it just to give it like the icing on the cake. So the LFE is like, for me, it's kind of like once you have all the elements that you want, it just gives it that extra punch that fills in the middle, that you don't lose. And a lot of times because of the DSP, it's very like, it's very direct. You know what I mean? When I'm working on like a lot of legacy records or records that are catalog, it's a gift and a curse because naturally, because of the DSP, this stuff sounds more modern automatically once it's going through Atmos. So at times I would have to kind of, again, I'm all the way at the top, but then I got to bring myself down, you know what I mean, to match the stereo. But theoretically, it's like we want it to sound better. You know what I mean? So um, having that Atmos kind of automatically gives you that kind of access, and because we're not fighting for space anymore, it's kind of like that part of the fight is over. Now we can really dial into how we want to carve out the music and create the low end or create that top or whatever it is.
Yeah. And then on the other end of the frequency spectrum, but certainly just as important, if not more, I mean, the legacy records that you're working on feature some of the greatest vocalists and MCs of all time, right? Like, I
Hmm.
mean,
Hmm.
uh, when it comes to like vocals, what I'm sure it depends on, the situation, but how do you tend to treat them when it comes to like layering and stacking or mains, backgrounds, harmonies?
Yeah.
Do you like to use the height channels in some cases, or how do you approach it? And honoring that original artistic intent with some of these amazing, the Ericas, the Nellies, these
Yeah.
people that are just like their voices are so iconic.
Yeah, definitely. So for me, I love to keep the lead. The lead vocal is the most consistent vocal, so I like to keep that in my stereo image. Um, and then I also like to push it out a little bit. So I'll have my lead vocal, push it out a little bit into the wides. May give it a little bit of center, depending on, because the center gets a little weird and phasey sometimes, but it works in the room. Now I have my lead vocal. It may a lot of times it needs a little bit of compression and EQing because of the curve, or depending on the room or how it sounds in headphones. And then that's when the fun starts, and I have my backgrounds and ad libs and things like that. Sometimes the backgrounds could be just as consistent as the leads, so I may even keep the backgrounds in that stereo image, and I may do a send to like some of the other speakers in the back. But more importantly, and especially what I've been doing in my most recent projects, I've been carving out all of the background ad lib vocals, and I've been turning them into objects. And I would use the mode where it's not cinematics, the mode where it has a little person in the middle. And I would use that person, that's me, and I would strategically put these different vocals in different places. Some in the back, some maybe right in front, some on the sides, and I would give it different size options. Now, alongside with that, right? We know all of this stuff is all currently on the same frequency. So I would also I would EQ each and every vocal differently, just so it can give it more dynamic range, right? And when people are hearing it, you're hearing not just the change of tonality and the tone of of the vocal, but you're actually hearing it sonically different as well, like the frequency, and that creates like that wow factor. You know what I mean? So, and I love records that have a lot of build up. You have your intro, you have your verse, pre-hook, hook. Those are the best records because you literally take one step, then the next step, then the next step, and then you're at like the pinnacle of immersion. You know what I'm saying? And then it goes back down, and it's just a flow. You know what I mean? Um, and I treat instruments sort of similar. I'm a little bit more uh out the box with the instruments. Um, but that's really like for vocals, that's like what I love to do. And I like to keep things really like in a like a curve, like a U, you know. And then if there's things that are very inconsistent, like a special moment where there's like some type of whatever it is, I would use that to put it somewhere in the back, or I would put it right in front of you. You know what I mean? Just to come in subtly at some point of the record. And again, that creates like the experience, and it all depends on the content that I have. You know what I'm saying? Like I had a record not too long ago that had like there was like I think like a car caught on fire or something like that, and I was like, how would this be if I was in front of this right now, right? If I'm in front of a car that's on fire, the car would probably be, I would be facing the front of the car. So, I would create an object of the car and right in front of me. And then I made the car pass by as if I was walking past the car, because that went along with the music. So that's what's cool about Atmos is like you're either creating or recreating the story for the experience of, consumers or artists, whoever to listen to. And it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing.
That's awesome, man. Thanks for sharing that. That's so cool. And you're finessing it in there, and kind of creating a new experience for
No,
people.
not finesse. We don't like that word. We like to say innovate. We like to say
Innovate.
innovate.
Well, your workflows are innovative, and it's really cool what you're doing. And before we talk about kind of like starting in Atmos, I do have a question for you about translation to headphones. How are you using the binaural settings plugin? What have you found works best when it comes to the choices that you make there and making sure that that's preserved?
I love to keep things very direct. So for the most part, I'm using near. My near setting is really what I like to use. And then, when I want to create some sort of distance, or I want to kind of showcase what I'm doing immersively, then I would go more into the mid and far settings. Um, Mid and far, I'm usually using like if I'm using stuff that are at my tops, right? I would use like a far setting, or if I'm using background vocals that are kind of faint and not too present, or like ad libs and things like that, I would use like mid far settings. And same with instruments, if I'm getting like a chime kind of instrument or something that's a little bit on the lighter side, I would go mid far, or things that I think that sonically are moving around in the room. But I like to keep, majority of everything near, just so you can, because what I've noticed just listening to it in headphones, um, when we add the mid and the far stuff, it creates sort of like an effect, but the effect also creates the distance that kind of creates the immersive experience in headphones. So I use it strategically to try to match what I'm doing in the room.
Absolutely. So you're testing that translation on headphones, like at the time that you're making those decisions. Are you also testing on other playback devices or just studio headphones?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I go through a series of different things, right? So I have obviously the room, the studio. I have these. I have the in-ear versions, the AirPod Pros. I have a pair of Audeze LCD 5s, which those are where I start with those. That's like start. And then like just I play back in like Sonos systems. Um, and I've had the opportunity to listen back in cars as well, which is really cool. So that's another thing that's cool about it. There's like so many different ways to play this stuff back, and it's good to hear what it sounds like. It's good to hear what it would sound like folded down into a 714 or a 5.1 or even to stereo. You know what I mean? And I've been experimenting a lot with folding things down to stereo and doing a lot of A/B and comparing, and I'm just like, man, this is like a stereo plus. Like this sounds, like the stereo version of this sounds so good. Even like, the guy I have an assistant that helps me out, and like he's like, man, we put stuff in through through the renderer and the Pro Tools, and we just bounce it out, and we're like automatically without even much processing. It automatically sounds like it's a richer record and it's a bigger record. You know what I mean? And that's just like technology is just so crazy now. So it's cool.
Nice, man. Well, you pretty much answered what my next question was going to be, and that's
Oh,
how what your process is for deriving your stereo mix from your Atmos mix, but then also like how that process improves the stereo mix. And I think you just touched on it a little bit. If there's
yeah.
anything else you want to add to that, feel free. And I'm curious, like more specifically, are you using the trim and down mix control settings in the renderer as well to ensure that translation?
What I do is, yes, I go into like I started doing it upon request. I wasn't doing it just to generally do it. Um, some clients that I was working for were requesting different formats, and I was just like, "Oh, this is cool. Let me see what these downfolds are like." So I started experimenting with the downfolds, and that's how I got into top down mixing and like trying the idea of putting something in Atmos first and then folding it down into stereo. And it's really cool. You know what I mean? I think that what it's done for me is it gave me the approach to start mixing in Atmos first from a stereo perspective. So now like I'm in Atmos, but like because I'm A/Bing and going back and forth on what the fold down would sound like, it's helping me adjust on how I would mix and that beginning stage, right? To make that stereo sound still like what stereo is today, you know? Um, and that's just something that's gonna be, I feel like the experimenting on that is just gonna grow because, it's a good way to start like when we're starting from the top and getting the end result. Like it's kind of cool to see how everything comes into into two channels. You know what I mean? From you got the other day, I think I maxed out on the amount of objects that I use. It's like the biggest record I've ever done, and I'm like, I don't have any more objects. It literally took like 10 minutes to bounce the record out, and I'm just like, I wonder what this is gonna sound like if I fold it down in stereo. So it's cool just to see, and then you move, you go back and forth. You see like, oh, if I move, if I have this synth in the far back, with the size increased, when I fold it down in the stereo, it does this. It blows up on this side, or if I add too much LFE, it kind of swallows the song. So you kind of see what these things are, and kind of create a way to carve out how you want your stereo mix to sound from an Atmos perspective, which is super cool. Yeah.
Awesome. Wow. Thanks for sharing all that. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here now, and I'm sure they're all
Uh oh.
technical, but what have been some of your favorite projects to mix in Dolby Atmos?
Some of my favorite projects that are out right now. One of my one of them, which, and I think this is probably the best project because, again, non-traditional, right? This project was Hidden Youth Surfaces. It's like a two group band, and it's like disco, funk, hip hop. There's so many elements in this stuff, and it's not something that I would normally work on. So when I got it, I was like, oh, this is gonna be interesting. But I think because I'd never worked on anything like it, I gave it the best shot that I had. And you know, it was I had to think about things differently. I had to think about the low end differently. You know what I mean? I had to think about the instruments a little bit different. It really like it had me like my mind was just thinking. And I felt, with that type of approach, I probably created like a new sound because I'm coming from a place where, I don't normally know the traditional way of how these records should be mixed. I do my due diligence and I like to look up things, but end of the day, right? As a creative, it's like we like to try things and we like to break rules. So I think from that it led me on to being more comfortable with other projects that I would never think that I would touch. You know what I mean? So that's one. My other favorite project was I worked on the series Pitch Perfect. It's on Peacock right now. I think they're going into season 2. And that was really cool because that was like theater, a cappella, percussive, and like they're doing stuff like this, like they're beating on like different things. I never thought I would work on something like that. And again, because it was something that I've never done before, I have like a raw talent kind of approach to it, which gives it character, it gives it substance, and I think that's what makes it cool. You know what I mean? And those are my most favorite projects. The stuff that I've never even thought that I would touch, or the stuff that I would not, normally work on a normal day to day mixing. And I want to do more of that stuff. That's really all I want to do.
Well, you've had an awesome journey so far, and it sounds like the best is yet to come. So thank you for sharing all of this with us. If folks want to find out more about what you're up to, do you have a website or anything that they could check out?
Well, as of right now, I'm on social media, Instagram, Roc.AM. I am working on, getting a site and a lot of things coordinated, but that's predominantly where I am. That's where I like to like post a lot of the things that I'm doing. And as this grows, I want to start growing with the community and start building, more content and showing people, like this is a new way to make music, especially artists and influencers. They need to be very well acclimated with what's going on, and they need to know that it's cool. You know what I'm saying? So I wanna start showcasing that a lot more and getting people involved and doing workshops and production camps and things around immersive sound and what the sound can be like for the future, the revolution of music.
Right on. Looking forward to all of that. And thank you so much for your time, Roc. It's been a pleasure, man.
For sure, man. Thank you.
All right. Well, use the QR code on the screen now to grab a 30-day trial of the Dolby Atmos Album Assembler. We talked about it a little bit off the top of the session. You can also see the quick start video for version 1.1 of the Album Assembler at professional.dolby.com. And we also did a community session with Jordan Glasgow doing a deep dive demo along with the Georgetown Masters guys from last year. So be sure to check that out. We'll bring Roc on now for Q&A. We have a lot of great questions coming in. So thank you everyone for sending those in. And you can continue to do so in the Q&A panel here or by emailing them to musicwebinars@dolby.com. And just waiting for Roc to jump on with us. There he is. All right. Welcome back.
Good to be
Got
back.
a lot of good questions coming in, man. First from Christian, and you talked about this a little bit in our chat, Roc, but do you have any hints for immersive delays and instruments when working in Dolby Atmos?
Yeah, definitely. What's cool is just, I like to work with the assets. That's always the best. And I think it's the best, especially when you're dealing with catalog stuff and frontline things, meaning like music that hasn't been out. Because a lot of people are committed to the effects and the way that the demo sounds, and they just want something that's a little bit more, out there. So I like to use if they send like a separate effects channel, I would use, the separate effects stems, and I would work with that around the room, which is always the best. You get the best results from that. Um, and if they're committed, you know what I mean, you can use what's committed and then add extensions to that, that sound whatever sounds sonically right. There's a lot of cool plugins out there. Like they have like 714 plugins like Stratus 3D. I think it's Isotope, cinematic rooms, and there's a lot more coming. But for the most part, see what you got first and try to use that. And if you want to expand on it just to give it a little bit creative content, go for it.
Nice, thank you. Got a couple shout outs here. One for from Chris Conacher saying Dennis is amazing. Got one from Sam Downey wishing us a happy new year, and also an interesting one for you here that was sent in asking how important is it to have a nickname such as Roc.AM when it comes to being a mix engineer?
Wow. So, man, to be perfectly honest, like I even before this interview, and just my entire journey, because this wasn't really my end game, becoming a, music engineer. It was just something that I learned and kind of just picked up on because, I didn't really have the studios and things like that. I didn't have access to those things coming up. So, I wanted to just figure out how to do it on my own, and it kind of created a lane for me. And not too long ago, before this interview, I was talking with Nick Reeves. He's another amazing mixing engineer. Um, another, I look at him as like a pioneer as well. And we were in LA, and he was talking with a bunch of A&Rs and different people from labels, explaining the educational aspects of Atmos and things like that. And after I'm talking to him, I'm like, man, like you speak so well. Like I want to speak like you. Can you like teach me how to talk like that? And he's like, well, man, it's just all about like you being yourself. And I'm like, listen, I have some interviews coming up. People want to talk to me about this stuff, and because I'm not just so technical with like how I say things, and just how I listen to music and how I make music is just not technical at all. It's really just me going with what I feel and what's right. But I'm like, man, like how am I gonna like sound like you? And he's like, man, listen, they want you for you. Just be yourself. You know what I'm saying? So to go with that question is just like I wanted to be myself and be the person that I was from day one before being a mix engineer. And I wanted to carry on the evolution of that. You know what I'm saying? And I think when you're yourself, is more room for just being. You have so much more opportunities as far as creating. You're not following specific rules. You're doing things and you're innovating, and that's just what people want. They want you for you. They want the sauce. They want they want your background. That's what makes the world go round. And music is just like a universal language, so we need a little bit of everything involved.
Yeah, man. Amen to that. And that's good advice from a wise guy like Nick Reeves as well. So always a
Mm,
special shout out to Nick
sure.
for sure. All right, a couple questions about your hardware chain. Eduardo's asking, what hardware equipment do you like to use? You touched on it a little bit, but kind of specifically, what are kind of some of your favorite pieces to put together when it comes to mixing in your
Yeah,
studio?
I mean, what's cool? Oh, and just in general. Well, I love. I'm a hybrid mixer. Just like in the interview, I was blessed enough to really, learn about a lot of outboard game processing, and I'm a little bit crazy about it. But I like to generally go with like recording in, like a 1073 Neve or BAE, and tube tech compressor CL1B or like a 1176. And I just like to make sure my recording chain is really good going all the way in. I do like to experiment with different EQs, mag EQs, or like I would just look up like EQs on eBay from like different places and just try to see like what those things sound like. But that's generally what I use. And then I like to do a lot of summing. Boards are not really like a big thing anymore, but I do love to have that analog sound. So, like an Orbit or like a Sigma summing mixer where you get that nice SSL sound is always great. But we're living in a digital world now, and like it's just getting cooler and cooler. Like I've seen recently, like they had a summon plugin that just came out with UAD, and I was just like, this, it's it's getting really crazy with what they can do. You know what I'm saying? So, but generally now, I just like to make sure I'm recording in just to get that feel and that sound, and then everything else could just be in the box and then coming back out. I like to be analog hardware as well.
Nice, thanks. Got a couple more shout outs here. One from Tanisha saying that you're awesome, and Erica R saying, "Rock, you're lit, be yourself." So some
Appreciate
some
that.
love from the audience there, which is great to see.
Yeah.
You talked about this a little bit. This is a QC question from Damien. How are you sending your reference mixes for your clients or to listen to, or on different devices?
Yeah. So in Dolby, there's a way you can export to MP4s. MP4s can be played on your iPhone. And you can use, whatever, hardware you have. The most related relative would be like the AirPod Pros or Pro Maxes. Um, I think now they released a new laptop actually too, where it's like Dolby enabled. And then I usually go with that. And then there's a lot of playback systems that are coming out that are more curated for like end user use or at home. Sonos has a great system, and you just test out all of these things, and you just listen to what your you listen to what your mix sound like on different systems.
Yep,
And if you have the renderer, you can just upload the ADM file into the renderer and listen to the binaural mix on that as well with headphones.
yep.
So
Awesome, thanks. Kind of a general question from David, but what would you say to an engineer that wants to find an artist and create a project with them? That's a pretty broad question, but like I'm sure it depends on the situation. But maybe somebody that's just kind of getting started, that's an engineer and is really looking for a cool project.
I would say keep things natural. Don't go in with no intentions. Don't go in trying to make a record specifically for this type of style, for this type of person, or for this type of music. Like I've learned, just the most like effortless stuff is just the best stuff, and it's the biggest win because like no effort is really your intuition. You're going with the first thought, and that's usually the right gut feeling is usually the first strike. So like don't overthink it. Go with whatever lines up with your life, and just keep it natural, man. And you're gonna build and experience so many different possibilities, and you're just gonna keep leveraging every single time.
Nice, thank you. A little bit about your Atmos workflow specifically and thinking immersively. This question is from Marcus, and it's how do you sequence your workflow with Atmos and the other deliverables? Can it feel overwhelming for your creative mind to constantly think about all of the channels, or do you focus on the track first and then bring it up to Atmos?
So usually when I get the assets, I like to listen to the stereo a lot. And once I set everything up, I'll just A B the stereo and the Atmos reference before I decide to move things around and create placement. And then I just take things one step at a time. It's the same process I use for stereo mixing. I'll solo and I'll probably start out with my drums, kick, bass, things like that. Get all of that put together, and then I'll go to the synths and music, then the effects. Then I'll go to the vocals and kind of like reroute myself and start going back and forth just to create some type of balance.
Awesome, thanks. Um, Yeah, you touched on using the Odyssey headphones a little bit, but David Mollo asks what your recommendations are for getting started mixing in headphones. Any recommended headphones?
Yeah. Listen, Odyssey has a lot of cool stuff right now. They have the LCD fives, they have the MM500s. Um, and I would experiment again. Apple is That's what the AirPod Pros and the Pro Maxes are really what a lot of us are listening to this stuff on. So I would even start there and kind of work from what everybody else is hearing and kind of learn which every device and how it translates. And then once you get into a room and then you start going from the room to devices to different playback systems, you'll find like a middle ground somewhere where you kind of know like how your stuff would sound. And you start there and it just becomes like a natural thing. Like you just automatically know where things are going to go, how it's going to feel, and along the line you'll just make your adjustments and move forward. That's all part of the QC process. So
Nice, man. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. I wanted to leave a couple of minutes to talk about some work that you've been doing over the past couple of months that you've been very busy with, some special Dolby Atmos mix projects. Do you want to share a little bit about what you've been up to lately, man, and
put me on the
what's
spot.
what's going on with you?
um Yeah. So just recently, with the Super Bowl and everything happening and Apple Music, we just released Rihanna's catalog and Dolby Atmos spatial audio, which was a tremendous experience. I got to really work with a lot of people, connected with her and just involved in the process of her catalog and the timelines, and it was just really cool. And every project comes with just like a different. It's just different, you have a different perspective. It's always mixed differently, and I learned a lot of things doing this. And it's always about applying the pressure and looking to just innovate and make things like not better, but just make them cool and be innovative about it. We are in a world where, again, technology is at it's at the highest. So I really just want to just continue to just thrive on being different and non-traditional, and really setting the bringing out like what a person like me, and you know not that you don't have to be so technical, but let's not lose sight of like the feel and where this started from, and how music was just it's all about just love and really coming together, what I'm saying, as a community. And that's how it worked for the project. Like, it was a bunch of people involved, and we all came together and locked in, what I'm saying, and we made a beautiful project. So
Nice, man. Well, congratulations on that. Folks can check out Roc's Dolby Atmos mixes for Rihanna on the enabled streaming services now. They're out there, so check them out. Well done, man. And thank you so much for joining us today, and continued success in
thank
the
you for
future.
having me, man. I appreciate it, man.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Catch you next time.